Hello everybody and welcome to my Dark Souls 3 boss power scaling. The idea here is pretty simple. Who is the most powerful of the Dark Souls 3 bosses? If they were to fight each other, where would they all stand? Who would take the most W's? Now 3 important rules were put in place here. 1. That they would be fighting in what's effectively Medea's arena, because that holds basically no environmental interference. 2. We consider the characters with no time to prepare for the fight, we just drop them in and see who wins. And 3, we consider the characters as they would be at their prime, not necessarily how they are in the game. This is based heavily on character lore, and considering this is Dark Souls we're talking about, there is a lot of room for interpretation here. Alright, let's begin. Alright, well first at the bottom of this list is the Deacons, which is probably the single easiest choice we had to make, considering that a couple of hits from the Ashen One's sword can bring them down. When you consider the extra size and power behind most of the other bosses, well, that would probably destroy the Deacons in one hit. That would destroy a lot of them in one hit, taking down whichever one was possessed and moving on to the next one. Sure, they'll have to wait from time to time for the next Deacon to get possessed, but it would really be easy for them, taking basically no damage. Taking size into consideration, any attack could hit multiple Deacons at once, and we're not even considering AoEs or charge-based attacks that would just, decimate a whole bunch of them without even needing to be specific. Now, the curse that the Deacons have is their biggest weapon, but it takes a ton of time to set up, and by the time they set it up, yeah, they're probably already dead. Next is that tree. Yes, it's a tree, it's big, and it could kill the Deacons in one roll or one butt stomp, but otherwise it's just too goddamn slow. Even the old Demon King moves fast enough to outpace everything the tree has to offer, except for maybe its tiny little hand. But that hand is so small and twiggy compared to most of the bosses that I could probably just grab it and smash it like the twig it is. Yes, the tree only has specific weak spots, but most of their bosses have really good ranged attacks, such as the homing soul masters that could just hit all the weak spots at once and kill it instantly, or some of the ones are really large and can just make it like a woodsman and cut it in half. Now the tree has the butt stomp going for it that could kill anything, probably if they somehow manage to actually be underneath it. Highly doubtful that's going to happen. Next on this list is the Crystal Sage. This one had a fair bit of debate, primarily because of its cloning ability, which would allow it to do some damage to the other bosses because of purely being able to, attack from multiple spots and not take damage when you're busy attacking the clones. The problem here, however, is that all the other bosses are either really big, have a lot of ranged attacks, or they just move really quickly, and they could just stroll up and destroy all the clones in a really short period of time, so they don't really have that much use to them. The thing here about this boss is he can parry, and so some of the parryable bosses could have a little bit of a struggle against him, but the Sage doesn't really parry an awful lot, and so I don't see this being much of a threat. Next is Index Gundyr. Considering we're taking the bosses at their prime, we could have honestly just used Champion Gundyr and ignored this guy. However, because of the Passive Man, there's a bit of a difference, and we decided it's worth taking him into account on his own. Speaking of which, that Passive Man gives this guy enough distance that he could leap from one clone of the Sage to the other ones, and there would be basically no time in between. Nevertheless, he's still parryable, and he is quite slow. Yes, very few bosses can actually parry him and take advantage of this, but when you consider the fact that he's also slow, that he also doesn't have a lot of damage, and that he doesn't have a lot of power behind his attacks, nor does he have the speed to kind of compensate, and he's a fairly large target, he's not really beating many people here. Half Fight. We almost didn't consider Half Fight, but we did. He can parry, so rip Index. Similarly, he would also likely beat people like Pontiff and the Champ because parry OP, and I know we said that's not really a factor for the Sage, but there's also a dependence on how often they choose to parry. But even though he would beat those two people who are a lot higher on his list, he would lose to a lot between, and so he gets this lower spot. Discounting the Guardian giving him help, it's a guy with a bow that can easily be tanked or avoided, or a guy with a sword that can pretty much be negated by the sheer size of most of the others. So Half Fight, but you're boring, and not getting any higher. Next is Sister Frieda, one of the first endgame bosses coming up early. I mean, technically, for Half-Light is also endgame, but he's kind of a weird one to consider. Anyway, we're going with Black Sister Fried here, and there's no help from Ariandel, aside from, of course, turning her into Black Sister Fried. Now, she is seriously fast, and an ultra special decapitation move could kill just about everyone in one shot, aside from, say, the giants and the dragons, who her scythes probably just couldn't fit around. And being able to take someone down in one shot, especially when you have her speed, is really helpful. She definitely has the speed to dance around for a while, and her visibility could give her a slight edge. But if someone else was to do an AoE that would stun her, she's just left there for an open strike and she would die. Also, her weapon is a scythe. A scythe! One of the most useless weapons ever created because it's not meant to be a weapon. When you factor in its size, its capacity to kill is just so low. Now, she could potentially beat anyone here, yes, maybe one time out of 100, but she died the other 99 times, and because her resistance is low as fuck, she just, doesn't even have the ability to tank anything. Yes, you can tank the Ashen one a couple of times, but when you bear in mind that we're not talking about the Ashen one, we're talking about people with way higher attack power, it's just going to fucking decimate her. Also, some of them are just way too big for her relatively small scythes to hurt their giant necks. Also, that's not very significant. It's just too fatal of a flaw, and her best bet of playing hide and seek can only sustain her for so long. Alright, we got that Wolfen owner. The champion Gravetender will probably just get killed by just about everyone straight away, both above and below on this list. Except for maybe the Deacons, and the Tree, and maybe the Sage. The Wolf, on the other hand, is a completely different story. It is fast, and it is deadly, and even after the owner dies to one shot of Sister Freed's Deadly Cat move, the Wolf would just charge right through her. Her invisibility won't mean much when he's zipping around from one side of the arena to the other. He would just hit her by accident probably, and if he doesn't, she's probably too far away to do anything. This makes it really strong against human-based characters, but again, anything large enough, which is probably just about every boss, could probably just hold him in place as he does his charge, and then, snap his neck. Or give a good kicking. Or use range attacks. Yeah, this Doggo and say Flash. Vort. Good old Vort. Honestly, his charge attack is literally the only reason he's this high up, otherwise he would have lost to Sister Frieda. Anyone with low defense would just get pushed over and die. A bunch of Deacons, flattened. Frieda, maybe invisible, but she stays still while she's doing so, unlike Vort's charges, which move like crazy. Not too powerful, but everything so far is kinda weak to other bosses. However, he'd probably have a hard time with that tree. GG Tree, you beat one person. Possibly. I mean, it's butt stomp again, but who's gonna die to that? Osiris, let's be honest, is just a scaled version of Vort. Changed my mind. Every reason for putting Vort in his place could be used for putting the Named King in his place. Charge attack? Yes. Ice attack? Yes. Lost his mind? Yes again. Nevertheless, he's still lanky AF, and if he stopped to do his breath attack, just imagine a larger opponent just reaching over, taking his scaly throat, and doing a Doki Doki neck snap. Next character. Alright, next up is the Abyss Watchers, and step 1 with using the Abyss Watchers? Define how we're using the Abyss Watchers. Option 1, as they are before they turn into Lords of Cinder. Here they are an unending legion that can just keep coming back indefinitely and beat everyone basically just on endurance because they will outlast everyone. This is a little problematic and is subject to how long it takes for them to resurrect, but we're saying they beat just about everyone except for the Giants and the Flyers and maybe Nameless. Second option would be to take them as they appear at the beginning of the boss fight, which just it doesn't seem worth doing at all. And then the third option is the option we are going with, and this is consider them as Lord of Cinder's second stage of the boss fight as a single Abyss Watcher when they kind of merge together. So, with this, he would be able to zip around in and out and attack pretty fast, but I don't think they'd be that effective. The attacks are relatively light, but they don't have the biggest amount of size attack, they don't have the most amount of leverage behind them. The small daggers are nice, but they're not going to have the biggest amount of effect on the larger bosses. Fire Trails. Nice. Although, how effective are they when most DS3 bosses already have fire attacks and have a lot of fire resistance going around, making it kinda null. Yeah, he's fast, but he's also not the fastest, and with a strong enough attack you can just combo him and break his whole life very quickly. The problem here is the same problem with every human so far. Low size, low defense. Bosses do more damage to the player character than the player character does to them, so if you can combo one and decimate their health bar, imagine if it was with the full might of another boss character. You might be less than halfway, but you're still one of my favourite bosses. Alright, next up is Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, or else Aldrich, Devourer of Men, or else Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. We've considered Aldrich to be the best anti-human character, as in he's very good at killing human characters and not necessarily good at killing non-human characters. Oh, but he got killed by a human. Ah, shut up. They all got killed by a human. I'm not sure which grade. But he killed gods. Yes, he did kill gods when the Pontiff captured him first and gave it up as a meal. Let's face it, Aldrich is nothing. Yes, his arrows have tracking, and as a lowly human or Ashen one with comparatively low defense capabilities, that is terrifying. But imagine someone with bigger size, or more defense. Imagine Medea getting hit with those arrows. Would he even notice it while he burnt Aldrich to a crisp? I don't think so. Aldrich has a long enough wind up on all of his attacks that are effective that most others could just start wailing on him before he even starts his. And those who can't can probably just tank it anyway. Oh, and fire, big group, we've already discussed this. Moving on. It's time for the champ, the true prime form of the Gundyr. So let's take this out of the way. While he stomps everyone below him on this list, Half-Fight would probably destroy him purely on the art of parry. Maybe I'm giving him more credit than he deserves, but when Half-Fight goes into parry mode, I simply wait him out or use unparryable attacks like filthy fucking magic. But regardless, the champ stomps. He stomps air. Oh wait, that was a kick? Whatever. Remember how I was talking about comboing low defense bosses? Well, this guy is that. Anyway, this guy's got the range, so rip safety zones. His Hellberg can let him attack from relative safety, and it still looks flexible AF, I might add. But still, he is very capable. Being honest, he's probably one of the smartest people on this list in terms of combat smarts, since we are specifically referring to him before he got infected by the Black Dinosaur. His position is very debatable, but we get into some of the higher tier opponents now, and everyone's bringing their A game. Alright, so this one, the reasoning is very simple. Can you survive the whirlwind of death? If yes, you are above her. If no, you are below her. Now, that explains about 95% of our reasoning, so let's explain the last 5%. Gundyr has lower range than her, despite what we said about him having higher range. The Dancer has even longer range. His attacks don't chain as well as hers, and he is much larger than the player character. Why does this matter? Because to beat the Dancer half the time you roll between her blades. The champion simply can't do that because of his size. He would get hit. Saying he could think her is a logical argument, but would he be able to do it in a fast enough time frame before he's already ripped to shreds? Put simply, she has too many attacks that he can't respond to, while he still has too few that she can't. So why is this old guy here? Because screw ageism, that's why. What are the fire bosses gonna do to him? Hit him with fire? Bruh, he is fire! Also remember, we're talking about these characters in their prime, and this guy's the first prime example of how the game self and prime self are different. See what I did there? It's very clever, wasn't it? Even with the old man self, he can shoot out his meteors and fire rings, so he doesn't even need to get close to you. And just imagine this guy when his bones weren't aching. We may not exactly know how fast he truly was, but catering for age and size, and looking at some of the other demons we may be considering later in this list, we could say that he will be fast enough to outmaneuver people like the Dancer. And that's not even to mention that if he was dying, he can pull out a large ditch, screw you, and explode himself. Truly an outstanding move, although not if it's against someone who could, jump out of the way or just tank the fire. He's got attacks for so many situations that he's just versatile enough to outdo everyone below him on the list. Pontiff Sullivan, born on a Monday, leaves the painting on a Tuesday, travels on a Wednesday, loses his soul on a Thursday, joins the Moonlight Knights on a Friday, usurps the gods on the weekend. Why is this god usurper not higher? Well, because he used underhanded tricks to beat them before they even got into the fight. This is low-key the Batman of Dark Souls. Just give the man prep time and he could beat most, if not all of the people here, just by giving himself the favourable situation. There is no doubt that if this man were to need to fight Yhorm, he would go and find himself the Storm Ruler. There is not another boss on this list who convinces me they would go out of the effort to do the same. But sadly, no prep time allowed. Also, yet another person to die to half-fight. No need to rediscuss this point. Outside of those critical hits, he's got some nice combos and the back-jumping floaty thing to avoid the whirlwind of death of the dancers. But the higher bosses just have too much raw power to worry about his attacks, and he moves slowly, some might say angelically, so certain fast range attacks might just tear him through just a teensy bit. Alright, so let's just clear this up. If this was just up to me, I'd put this guy number 1, because damn, the Soul of Cinder is one hard fight. Hardest fight in the game, am I right? Okay, maybe just me. He's versatile enough to keep the others on their toes, and he's got enough raw power to smash through defense. Pontiff is tough, sure, but it wouldn't be that unimaginable to have him caught up in the Wombo combo, and outrunning the Lightning Storm just seems mostly unfeasible. Of course, maybe that's just because the Pontiff never seems to be in a hurry, so we only know of his walking speed. So why is Soul not higher? Well, he has a lot of good packages, but at no point is he really the full package. Some people could keep out of his reach, or have the range. His dex build sure has advantages over basically everyone above him, just he doesn't really have enough damage to truly do anything with it. His other selves would find it hard hitting their mark, and if he uses magic, well, that's a GG. To him. GG to him, since it's his worst form. Sorry, Soul. You're still the number 1 hardest to me, in difficulty. But, just not when compared to other bosses. The Demon Prince. We're considering the combination of both of the two optional Demon Princes after they combine. To be honest, this guy was like basically the scale we used when we tried to scale the old Demon King. I'd love to say that in his prime he would be able to be on the Demon Prince's level, but we have to go a little conservative on the King. So these guys are fast, agile, powerful, and you know, they can fly! This is a great advantage in flight. Obviously in game they don't fly as much, but that's because they would make the fight boring and unbeatable, or just plain BS. Unless they specifically can't fly in a match, such as Calamite in DS1, it doesn't count. And that also doesn't count because it wasn't his prime. Placing this guy was not an easy decision, and while he won't beat the next entry, he may well beat 1 or 2 above him. His 3D maneuverability is a massive advantage, and were he in Attack on Titan, well, those Titans would be dead, even the Colossal Titan. But at the same time, it acts more like a berserker than a thoughtful fighter, and those with higher skill and training should very easily beat it, or swat him like a fly. I'm referring to Medea. He would swat him like a fly. Moving on. So, speaking of berserkers, we are now up to the Red Swordsman, Gale. He's strong, he's fast, but most important, he's small. Considering most of the bosses are quite big, this guy has the right size to still be big enough, but he's not so big that he's a very easy target. Now, I know the Ashen One is way smaller and they all hit him, but can the Ashen One move like Gale? Even when he's using Gale's sword, it's still just a hollow replication. Speaking of hollow, Gale is hollow. Kinda. Whatever. As cool as his Miracle and Crossbow are, they simply won't do much damage to the powerful bosses. Now, if we were talking about the Black Swordsman Guts' repeating crossbow, that would be a different story. But we're not, because that's not Dark Souls, it's Berserk. Now, imagine if you would, Gale shooting those arrows into Medea. Imagine Medea carrying. Congratulations, you have a good imagination. I should probably stop using Medea as my benchmark, but it's a pretty good example point. Imagine the Demon King then. Yeah. Now imagine the tree. I know it's a moot point, but he would squash those sad sacks so quickly the fight would be over before it even began. Alright, so the easiest decision to make in this entire list was not putting the Deacons first, but was putting Lorien above the Demon Prince. Why? Because we know he can, we know he did, it's described in lore. But you could argue he wasn't at his prime back then. I'd argue that to the best of our knowledge, the demons didn't get any stronger. So what is prime for this guy? Obviously, sometime when his legs were working. But what about his brother? So if we were considering his brother on his own, he may, at absolute best, beat Hinduex. But that's probably still being generous. But we do take Lorien before his injury with his brother on his back. Maybe support from the sides. Even disabled, he is a lit fighter. But Lorien, on the other hand, has a lot of things going for him. He is a very skilled fighter. He is very fast. He is big and he can do a lot of damage. He has the size to beat through attacks and hit vital organs. He has the speed to move out of the way. He is clearly very competent, having defeated the Demon Prince in the past. I think his spot up this pie is very justified. Dragon Slayer armor is high up. In fact, there are only 4 people left to go once we finish this guy. Now maybe since its name is the Dragon Slayer armor, it should be by default able to beat all the dragons, right? Wrong! Did you see the original cutscene in Dark Souls 1? Did it look like those fighting the dragons did so alone? No, they were in massive groups, so this guy is not capable of killing dragons alone, and that logic is clearly infallible, do not question it. Well, we're ignoring the Guardian Dragon here, of course, because a gentle breeze could kill that thing. The Turtle Shield has some mad defense, and unless you had a weapon strong enough to go through it, which I doubt anyone here has, or a way to knock it, which only few do, it's going to be nigh unbeatable. His willingness to make a fake defeat may beat some of the more human enemies, but most of them are already below him and they would have lost anyway. Lightning damage is one of the best effects to counter most bosses. It's just that those above are too powerful for those damages to make much of a difference. In the end, he's got a load of power and one of the best defenses outside of stupid amounts of health. I want to just say that all those between the Pontiff and the armor were incredibly close and hard to call, but this is the way we ended up calling it. Well, I guess I just summoned him, because who has more crazy amounts of health than the guy you're not even supposed to fight normally? To be honest, I didn't want to include him. He's not fun to consider. Or even play against, for that matter. Ultimately, we went with that this guy is slow enough that he loses to the higher ones, or they just have hard counters towards him. But towards the lower ones, well, that combination of massive size and scales that would soak up attacks while he slowly kills whoever is fighting is what brings him over the line. In fact, his size is big enough that most people would be hard-pressed to actually keep anything vital. Sure, fire is not the most effective thing in Dark Souls 3. I may have mentioned this once or twice, but it still does damage most of the time, and his physical attacks are no pushover. I imagine most fights go in a little something like this. Person buzzes around. Then, with their speeds typically lower than the player characters, they get bitten and eaten. The end. Eventually. However, and this is important, anyone large enough could boink him on the head, similar to how you're supposed to kill him. But how many people could fit that description if they haven't already been mentioned yet? Every point I just made can be repeated here. Medea is simply faster and has more attacks, and so we put him above the Wyvern. Also, dragons are better than wyverns, changed my mind. It just happens that the next 3 should all have pretty solid anti-dragon defense. But a few other things to note about Medea compared to the wyvern is his abyssal attacks, his AoEs, and his laser beam type attack that are very effective and would probably kill a lot of people faster than the wyvern could kill them. But it wouldn't really have them against the people we haven't mentioned yet. Okay, so this one had just some disagreement, but then there's also just so much interpretation here that it is hard. So as he was in the game, Wolnir would lose to just about everyone. But in his prime, just being alive, his sheer size is a super weapon. His torso has more height than any other boss except maybe the dragons. And so getting into those vital organs or lethal blows, like who's gonna actually be physically capable of doing that? Most people are nothing but ankle biters to him. Not to mention the leverage and weight on his massive strikes. They don't even need to penetrate. Blunt force trauma will do wonders. Maybe the Dragon Slayer's shield would slow the blow from killing, but it would get knocked out of its hands by doing so, and then die on the next attack. His slow speed in game is likely due to him being, a skeleton, and at prime, he should have way more speed and be capable of being a threat, because this guy was a threat, and not afraid to play dirty. But let's discount his summonable army, let's slowball his potential speed, still massive, still healthy AF, and at prime, Those bracelets aren't even a target. They're not even a factor. Does this mean we should also discount his poison? Maybe, but is it gonna do anything anyway? Swing away and swat all the enemies away. So personally, I view Yhorm as just being a smaller, most likely weaker Wolnir, but this is where he was put. Before the game, Yhorm was said to have fought with a shield, and before losing his reason to fight, he would have had more time and thought in his attacks. In game, he just doesn't care. He has no reason to fight, so he just fights kind of randomly. But give the man a reason, give the man a shield, and he would be a beast. Personally, I'm considering Prime being him fighting to protect the one he cared about. Both giants have the reach to bring down their swords upon the dragon's necks. So Yhorm should beat Nameless. He has more durability, with his shield he has way more solid defense, and his attacks also have mad range. So why is Nameless our number one? Well, this is a matter of interpretation, to be honest. In the lore, the Stormbringer has the power to bring giants to their knees, and when the sword is used, it has a very specific look to it. I mentioned earlier that the Pontiff is someone who, given prep time, would find a Stormbringer, but Nameless doesn't need that prep time. No, I'm not trying to say he already has a Stormbringer, but rather that he is the power that the Stormbringer possesses. He can fight by throwing the storm at the two giants, bringing them to their knees. If you believe we've incorrectly interpreted this lore, please feel free to move him 2 slots down in your mind, but this interpretation seems very likely. Also, even without this interpretation, he still stands a good chance. This guy has the anti-dragon down pat, speed, dashes, reach, and lightning. He could stay out of the range and then pounce with an attack. And his attacks will mean something, because I am aware you could say the same thing about Frida, but her lower health, stagger, and far more aggressive style would mean that she would be dead really soon. But Nameless is patient, and a proven warlord. The only thing that he did have a tenacity for standing still, meaning some of the other bosses might perform a few moves and attack him, but consider this. The bosses that could rush him, like Vort, don't have the power to capitalize. Those that have the damage, like the armor, lack the speed. Those with both don't have enough of either to really be effect. Lore is also an advantage for this guy. First son of Gwyn, got a lot of illusions defeats under his belt. Very helpful, I know, but with all this together, Nameless King was put as the most powerful boss in Dark Souls 3. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this power scaling of the Dark Souls 3 bosses. And since I know anyone who watches probably disagrees thoroughly on what I said, feel free to put your own list in the comments. Bye!